Welcome, everybody. It's nice people came out on the early Saturday morning of this almost the last of our celebration events for this glorious building, and appropriately one on social entrepreneurship, which I think really lies at the heart of what SOM has been and continues to be. I'm going to go off script for a moment in a little bit more of a somber mood than we will eventually end up. I know many of you who are in the area of social enterprise know the work of and knew the man Greg Dees. And I assume at least some of you know that Greg passed about a month ago. And so we just wanted to take just a moment of tribute to Greg. Greg was a 1981 graduate of SOM, heir still of a proud MPPM degree, went on to get his PhD, finished his PhD in philosophy, and then came back to teach for us for a spate of time in the mid-'80s, inaugurating courses on social enterprise and nonprofit management. He then went on to do the same thing at HBS at Stanford, and finally at his last home Duke, really carrying with him the seeds of this field to students across the country at the highest level, writing as he went in this area as well, receiving lifetime awards from places like Ashoka and the Aspen Institute. Very distinguished scholar and just a wonderful person. And he was ours. We claim him as ours. And I just wanted to begin by saying thank you to Greg for what he did for the field and to acknowledge his contribution to us as we begin that here at Social Enterprise in Moderator. So thank you, Greg. So I have assembled for us a dream team. Amazingly, but yet not surprisingly, they are all SOM people. And yet, if you were going to choose a team from all across the country and all across the world, you couldn't do better than this one. And I do think says something about SOM that we spawn people of this caliber and with this set of passions. We're going to talk about social enterprise. I think you'll be interested to see, as I was only kind of a little bit surprised by, as I thought about the panel in the last few days, the wide range of areas in which they practice their passions and their mission, from consumer goods and home products to beverages to child care to relief and development. That's a very broad menu of industries and areas and sectors, and yet you'll see in what they do, they are united by a set of principles and a set of mission drives. Some of you who went to Indra's talk yesterday might reflect, as you listen to them back, on her profits and principles work that she's doing in her company and how that connects to some of the spirit of what we will hear today. I've asked each of the panelists to begin by saying a little bit about what their organization is and who they are, with the help of a few slides. We've held it to very few slides. And so they will begin by going one after another, introducing themselves to you. Not that they particularly need an introduction, but it'll wake you up this morning. And then I have a few questions for them, and we'll start with a little work together up here, and then I will pretty soon get to the more interesting topics of letting you all ask questions of them. So again, welcome. I do think the work that this dream team has done really speaks to what is wonderful about SOM, what has always been wonderful about SOM, and what I know will be even better with the help of this wonderful new facility. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to start with Seth Goldman.
Thanks, Sharon. So 20 years ago was when I first came to SOM, and if you had told me at that time I'd be leading an organization that was involved in helping to eliminate billions of calories from the American diet, helping to promote the spread of organic agriculture, and helping to promote fair trade labor standards in the developing world, I would have come in, and thought about my background, having worked in, run a nonprofit in urban Baltimore, having worked on Capitol Hill, and said, oh, that's perfect. That would have, what's the name of the nonprofit or the government entity that I'm running? And just to sort of help illustrate that, I'll give you a quick feel for that. And so, sorry, this just is the visual of it. I never would have guessed that that entity would have been a beverage company, let alone a company that is now owned by Coca-Cola, or one that delivered a 26-fold return to its original investors. But that's what Honest Tea is. And it started in my house in Bethesda, Maryland. My co-founder is Barry Nailbuff, and we started with the idea of a less sweet beverage, and could we bring that to market? Why wasn't anyone making a product not with 10 teaspoons of sugar per serving, but 1 or 2? And so Barry came down to Bethesda. We made some samples in my kitchen, put them in thermoses with an empty Snapple bottle that we brought to Whole Foods, and started to first market a less sweet beverage. And then as we grew, we call it mission-driven growth, because every time we brought out an innovation, whether it was the first organic bottled tea, the first fair trade bottled tea, we kept seeing new opportunities and new expansion. And so eventually we grew to scale by just continuing to innovate, and eventually took on a minority investment from the Coca-Cola Company, which then led to an acquisition in 2011, and we've continued to grow with me still running the organization. So this year we just finished with $112 million in sales and being in over 100,000 stores around the country. And for me, Honest Tea really is about how do we change the American diet? How do we change agriculture in the developing world? And so it's really about the impact. That's how we measure our product, what we're doing. And if you go back to when Coke invested first in 2008, we were buying about 800,000 pounds of organic ingredients. This past year, we bought over 5 million pounds of organic ingredients. So we're really starting to change the way our suppliers think about, should we be organic, should we be fair trade? And obviously at the same time changing the way consumers think about what they're putting in their bodies. And so for us, I look at, when we think about our impact, I look at what's going on in the demographic trends. So the United States, despite the fact we're the wealthiest nation in the history of the world, when the United Nations recently ranked the average life expectancy of all the nations, about 200 countries in the world, we weren't number 1 or number 2, we were number 40. And so what does that say about our society, about our lifestyles, our diets? Clearly it has to change. And so how it changes is it's not going to happen from large corporations. It's not going to happen from government. I think it happens from entrepreneurs who can find ways to change our relationship with the natural world, with each other, redefine our diets, and take the risks. And when we can do it successfully, the larger corporations will invest and will buy in or buy out to make those investments. And by definition, large corporations aren't able to take those risks. They're too invested in the current direction. And so it is incumbent on us to find new paths. And when they can buy in, it can lead to very powerful change. And so one of the reasons I've stuck with Honest Tea, a lot of entrepreneurs, once they sell, sort of take their exit and go do the next thing. But for me, I feel like our work is both important and it's still being done. It still needs to be done. And it is, despite the fact I've been at this over 16 years now, it just feels like there's just so much more opportunity on the immediate horizon to keep doing it. Mm-hmm.
Linda Mason.
Thank you. So it's really, really a pleasure to be here. And I was just saying to Ted, it's actually fairly emotional for me to be here, having arrived here just a year after the school started, and to see where we are now, and have lived through the ups and downs over the years. It really feels like we've arrived, and I want to thank Ted and Sharon and the faculty and all the folks who made this happen. So thank you very much. So it's been 33 years since I graduated, and in that time, we have created 3 social enterprises. And when I say 3, each of the 3 were created by myself and my husband, Roger Brown, who is here. And Roger and I met at SOM, And we embarked on this entrepreneurial path, and it's been a wild ride ever since. So and we've created and run practically every iteration of a social enterprise, nonprofit, two nonprofits, a for-profit, the for-profit company Bright Horizons. Half its time it's been private, half its time it's been public. So we've seen quite the few iterations of the way you can organize and run a private enterprise. The first nonprofit we created was Save the Children Sudan. So when the Great Famine in Africa broke out in the mid-'80s and was in the news quite a bit, Save the Children had raised a couple $1 million for African relief, but had no operation on the ground, and was looking for a team of people to create a nationwide program in the Sudan. Our classmate, Neal, worked for Save the Children, and he recommended to the CEO that he talk to Roger and me. So we were hired as co-country directors, went over to the Sudan with a couple $1 million, raised another $15 million, and started a nationwide program from scratch. Because of the nature of the crisis, which was quite intense, it grew quite rapidly. So we ultimately administered services in 2 refugee camps along the Eritrean border and delivered famine relief in a large province in western Sudan near Darfur. Several SOMers were involved in this project. As I mentioned, Neal worked for Save the Children at the time, and actually the last year we were in the Sudan, he was our boss. We reported to him. He's a very good boss. And actually, we've had quite a turnabout because the last 6 years I've been his boss as chair of Mercy Corps. So I think we have a really good collaboration. Roger and I hired 2 SOMers, Lori Palmer and Buddy Kring, who came over, worked with us in the refugee camps, did a great job. And when we left, Ed Resor, class of 80, succeeded us and stayed in the Sudan and ran it for 4 more years. So there was a real SOM imprint on this program. When we left the Sudan and returned to the States, we were really bit by the entrepreneurial bug. And part of what we loved our work in Africa, and part of what we loved was the opportunity to create an institution from scratch with a mission, a set of values, an organizational philosophy, and see it come to fruition. So we wanted to do this again in our own country with something that would really make a difference in society. And later, I hope we talk about the DNA of SOM in fueling our desire to really make a difference. And most of our work in Africa had been with young children, so we started looking in the children's field and realized maybe the most important sociological revolution of our lifetime, which is the entrance of mothers of young children into the workforce, all needing childcare, and the tremendous lack of quality childcare in our country. So we started Bright Horizons in our home, our living room in Cambridgeport, worked out of our house for the first year and a half, slowly built the company, and now 27 years later, we are now nearly a $2.5 billion company. We operate 850 worksite child care centers across the country and in Europe. We opened our first center in Bangalore, India last year. We currently employ 24,000 people and serve every day 100,000 children. We also operate 8 elementary schools, private and charter. One of our most valued recognitions is for the last 14 years, we've been selected by Fortune magazine to be one of the top companies to work for in America, which we really value that. Our culture, we always say our culture is our most important business asset. And that's where we put the bulk of our energies around developing a passion, mission-driven culture. And again, I could get into this later, but before we raised our capital, we raised venture capital, we created a mission statement and a set of organizational values that's been our beacon throughout the organization's history and has helped us keep this line of quality. We started Bright Horizons, unfortunately, at the eve of a significant recession in New England in 1987, and we started seeing the growth of a new segment of homelessness, which were mothers of young children. This segment was getting, at that point, absolutely no care or services whatsoever, and we felt very moved to do what we can to serve this sector. Before I leave Bright Horizons, I do want to mention a few other SOM connections in that Bill Donaldson was instrumental as a mentor and advisor from the very beginning when we created Bright Horizons, served on our board for many, many years, was incredibly helpful throughout, and particularly when we took the company public. Melanie Ray, class of 1980, also worked for us for many years. And Josh Beckenstein, even though he didn't graduate from SOM, he's really an adopted SOM grad, has served on our board for 27 years and hasn't missed a board meeting yet. So we created in 1988 a nonprofit, Horizons for Homeless Children, to provide childcare and related services for homeless children and their mothers. And with its goal of both giving the first 5 years of life are so absolutely fundamentally critical in the development of a human being, and so giving these children a great start in life and working with the mothers to help them finish their education, jobs training, and placement. And that has grown right alongside Bright Horizons. So these are the 3 enterprises we've created, and feel very excited to talk to you more about that as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. One of the places in which I got most credit from my children was the day in which my son called and said, "Do you think you can possibly help us get into Bright Horizons?" So that's another Yale connection. Neal?
Thank you. My name is Neal Keny-Guyer, and I work with Mercy Corps. But first, good morning. Good morning. Thank you. But you know, those of us who get to travel, if you go places like Africa, there's always a tradition. You know, if it's good morning, good afternoon, there has to be an enthusiastic choral response. So thank you. And I know it's early morning, and it's great to see. Everybody. Mercy Corps is an international relief and development organization. We work in 42 countries around the world. Our mission is really to build secure, productive, and just communities, and we use the euphemism in the world's toughest places. And for us, that really is focusing on a target population that Paul Collier, the economist, called the bottom billion. And it's sort of these places, often fragile countries, where conflict, poverty, and poor governance collide. And in most of those places, sort of the advances and progress of the global market system that helped eliminate so much poverty in China and India, we haven't seen the same progress in these fragile countries. So is there magic sauce? Is there a way to make progress? Well, first of all, there's not. There are no silver bullets, as we all know, to any of the tough social challenges we face. No single organization acting alone will ever solve a problem of that scale and magnitude. But partly, I think, from my own experience with SOM, my own experience working with Save the Children, my own experience trying to provide it, no one's a boss of Roger and Linda and Ed Reeser, I can tell you that. You learn a lot of humility. But from all of that, it was clear to me in the course, I sort of said, if I ever had the chance to run my own organization, what would be some of those ingredients that would be important? And if you sort of think of the world of international relief and development has been dominated either by the big multilateral players and then increasingly in the 80s and 90s by large international NGOs. Now there are a whole host and a network from social entrepreneurs to social innovation, local organizations. It's healthier. But what was really missing, and I think this is true in social markets anywhere, is the incentives for being really innovative don't line up. One thing is for sure, and I know we're going to come back and talk about this, in the for-profit world, by and large, sometimes it gets overstated, you really do have to innovate or die. In the not-for-profit world, in social markets, if you're a pretty good storyteller and you can raise money, you can exist almost irrespective of your impact and results, despite what people say about the focus on impact. And so there aren't the same kind of incentives to drive innovation, new ideas, new partnerships, ways to combine tried and true practices in different ways for greater impact. And so we had the audacity at Mercy Corps that maybe among the sort of larger international NGOs, we could really focus on bringing innovation to the world's toughest places, and that could be a distinctive niche for us. And I really do think this goes back so much to my time here at SOM, whatever that DNA is. For me, it was kind of hatched here. And has been incredibly important. And in fact, throughout the world of Mercy Corps, about the only ideological document we have in our leadership development is what does it mean to be a social entrepreneur? Everything else in terms of adaptive leadership and all the other things that are important, we all know. But it really, those core values were critically important to me. And I think it's critically important if we're going to solve the tough social challenges that we face, particularly in a global sense, bringing clean water, clean energy, inclusive financial services. As one of the panelists said yesterday, 2.5 billion people on our planet have no access to real financial services. In a lot of these fragile states, what we talk about are bringing the magic sauce of the 3 Gs. How do you address grievance? How do you address growth? Because in so many of these countries, if you don't have economic growth, particularly at the grassroots level, you can't sustain gains in health, education, and social welfare. But finally is governance. How do you work in ways that improve, connect community members as citizens to local government, to larger forms of government? It's absolutely critical. I'm going to just run through. I want to just give some examples of social innovation. First, I want to say that I think this is often hinders us as it kind of went through. Let me just go back, because this is the best slide. How many times has that been the case? It can't be done. And I think that gets a little bit to, if when you come to the sort of world of international relief and development, it's been largely grant funded. And despite what these foundations say, they're really pretty risk averse, right? They want tried and true practices. They want proof of concept. And so you often get work down here, mid-scale, impact, but lower risk. And you don't get the incentives lining up for the big breakthroughs, where I think has been the power of social innovation and social entrepreneurs. And that, I know that's something we want to come back with. This is just a list of some of our innovations. They're listed on the website. I'll just speak to one very quickly to give you an idea. So Bank Andara is this notion in Indonesia. Indonesia is one of the world's largest microfinance markets. The challenges of microfinance, and so many of you have been involved in that, is that it's basically been, people have taken a retail approach. You think Grameen, but Grameen Bank, BRAC, these others. Well, Grameen will never be big enough, right, to solve a problem of microfinance. And instead, what we tried to look at in Indonesia, what if you looked at the whole ecosystem and architecture of microfinance? And could you, through a wholesale bank, a bank for all the microfinance, create a technology platform over which you could introduce innovative products and services at scale, mobile banking, risk insurance, and so forth. So that was the idea there. The Gates Foundation invested. We own a bank regulated by the Central Bank of Indonesia, but its whole focus is on strengthening and lifting that whole ecosystem for microfinance as a way to have real scale and close the gap of the 40 million people in Indonesia that now have no access to microfinance. So that's an example, and there are other ones there, and it's just great to be here and great to be with this good group.
Thank you, Neal. Chuck.
All right. Get this to move ahead. Good morning. It's really a great honor to be here, and I'm very humbled to be here with the three of you, I have to say. I've had the pleasure of being involved in 2 entrepreneurial startups since my time here at Yale. The first was TravelSmith, a travel clothing business that I started just a couple years after leaving SOM. That grew to about a $100 million business, and I had the good luck and good fortune, good timing to sell about 10 years ago. And then I started this organization, Living Goods, and I'm obliged to give a shout out to Yale on 2 counts. First to Sharon, because TravelSmith grew out of a project in Sharon's class. And Living Goods was both funded and inspired and supported by Bill Draper, who many of you know, who served on the Yale Corporation and was kind of a founding father of the venture capital movement out in our neck of the woods in California. At SOM, I think what really matured in me and what has animated me since is this question that I think we're all speaking to in one way or another, is how can you use the tools of business to really address large, hairy social needs and social problems. And that's what Living Goods is about. What does Living Goods do? What we do is we create and support these networks of Avon-like entrepreneurs who go door to door and they teach people how to improve their health and improve the economics of their household. And then they make a living by selling low-cost, high-impact, life-changing products like some of these you see on this slide. Solar lights, high-efficiency cook stoves, basic medicines, fortified foods, and so forth. And it really was very much inspired by sort of the Avon and Amways of the world. And many of you may not know this, but Avon was started 150 years ago in this country when this country looked a lot more like the emerging markets that we operate in today. Part of the story I'm obliged to tell is I actually became very briefly, and not very successfully, an Avon lady myself to learn that business model from the inside out. I'm still learning.
I can hear the ding dong.
Yes. And I think it's a very exciting time. And I don't know how many students there are in the audience, but if I were to say, I think the message 150 years was go west, young man. I think my message is go east. I think the opportunities in the emerging markets today are just incredibly exciting. There's so many people, graduates from business schools who are flocking to Silicon Valley and trying to start the next .com. And it seems to be a very crowded place to try to succeed in. The opportunities we're seeing in Africa and the other emerging markets to build very successful, high-profit, and high-impact businesses, to me, is just terribly exciting. And what you're seeing on this slide here is sort of what we see as a nexus of driving forces behind our future success. So first, there's sort of the platform of direct selling, one of the fastest-growing industries, growing faster than the big packaged goods companies, faster than Unilever and Nestle. It's a $160 billion industry, and growing fastest in the emerging markets. Of course, as Neal referred to, we have the growth of expansion of financial services to the poor. Started really 30 years ago, but really accelerating in the last 10 years. Then there's mobile. And it's, of course, today in places like Africa, it's not just the mobile phone, which is growing in penetration, and the rates are coming down really fast. It's now the rise of mobile money. And then last but not least, of course, what we're seeing here in social media and social networks is migrating to these emerging markets. You put all four of these things together, it's a very powerful mix. It really empowers these small entrepreneurs, enables them to become much more profitable, and to extend the reach and impact of the work that they do. We have a core reason for being, which is to deliver impact really on a social scale, not just an organizational scale. And so if we grew to be, I think as you described, like a BRAC or a Bramin, $500 million or $1 billion business, that would be great, but that doesn't bring us to the success of the mission that we're ultimately after. And so what are the implications of that ambition? Well, there are really two. One is we do believe you have to create profitable businesses. We see some of the same challenges and limitations in getting funding from philanthropy and from the public sector. It's the simple math is just a much smaller pool of money. And so if you want to do something very big that addresses a very large population, you've got to think about tapping into the traditional capital markets. And the other thing, Neal, that you said, which is very true for us, is that if you want to have impact on a social scale, you're never going to do it alone. And the implication for us has always been we need to partner to share our learnings and to partner with and to seek scale by replicating across society through society's largest institutions, in both the nonprofit sector and the for-profit. And that's why one of the biggest initiatives we have going today is a partnership division And we've had over 200 inquiries in the last 2 years from organizations across the sectors who want to replicate what we do in some form or another. They include organizations like Goldman and BRAC. We've actually had a small partnership with a spinoff in Central America with Mercy Corps, but also Unilever and P&G and Amway. And, Seth, I really connected with your story because, one of the big opportunities for success that we see is trying to bring companies like Nestle and P&G into more healthy products. And we're launching a healthy fortified food product this year. And a big win for us would be showing Nestle that there's a way to reach a new consumer with a much healthier product.
Thank you, Chuck. So one of the things I'm known for in the classroom is cold calling on the students. So sit up for a moment, students, because one of the things we've heard here and I heard at breakfast with this team was the question, is it still in the student DNA to come to SOM wanting to do something great for the world and society? Students, is there anyone who wants to answer that question? Are there still those of you out there?
We are.
It's still part of what you want, isn't it? So rest assured, and I'll assume in your questions you'll reflect the particular brand of that interest in doing something for society that I think continues to attract students here. For some reason, who knows what it is, but it still continues. So a few questions for all of you. Social entrepreneurs. So David Bornstein, another giant in the field, has argued that social entrepreneurs are really no different from private entrepreneurs. They're all the kind of people who stay at the poker game a little too long, putting the money back in the pot when they should go home sensibly. And that the only thing different is that one seeks profit and the other seeks social value. I've always been a little suspicious of that, and so I wondered if you could chew that around a little bit. And the particulars in which I'm suspicious is one that Neal mentioned, and that is the risk-taking issue. There are things in the nonprofit environment that I think may constrain the entrepreneur from doing risk-taking. And another mentioned by several of you in terms of the collaborative. Neal's observation, it was hard to boss around Linda, which could have been true in the private sector as well. But maybe the need for a little bit more inspirational leadership and less bossiness in the nonprofit sector. You've all worked kind of across the sectors in different areas. Can someone speak? Maybe we'll start with Linda around, are there different requisites for entrepreneurial leaders in the sectors?
Sure. And my short answer is no, that I see so much more similarity than difference. And, we started the organization in Sudan, and then a few years later we started Bright Horizons. And we first tried to start Bright Horizons as a nonprofit because so much of childcare is in the nonprofit field, but we couldn't access enough adequate capital to grow a large organization. So we thought, well, what can we form as a for-profit, and what does that mean to our mission and values? And as Roger and I looked into this and really thought about it, we concluded that there's nothing in the way you're organized legally that would determine your commitment to quality and your commitment to changing the world. So it's really more a matter of what is your mission, knowing that, stating it explicitly, and having it infuse the organization. And so we don't think, we have our nonprofit arm, Horizons for Homeless Children, and our for-profit arm, Bright Horizons, and we don't see any difference in the kind of mission we have. And within Bright Horizons, we talk a lot about our success depends standing on two strong legs, commitment to quality and financial strength. And you need one for the other, and they have to both be strong. And we use the metaphor that you don't live to breathe, but you need to breathe to live. And likewise, we don't live to create profits at Bright Horizons, but we need the profits in order to live in the way we want to live. So I think before we even went out and created the company, there was a small group of us working out of our house. we went on our first retreat. I don't know why we went on a retreat, because we were just in a little house anyway, but we went to another little house in the woods for 3 or 4 days, and we created a mission statement and a set of 6 organizational values. And our mission statement focused on our 5 stakeholders: the child, which was the most important, the family, our own employees, the clients we serve, and our shareholders, and laid that right out so that our employees understood we had to serve these 5 stakeholders, and our shareholders understood it as well. And I think so knowing your mission, and actually when we took the company public and we went on our roadshow, we had in our roadshow presentation, the first third of it was about our quality mission. And I remember our investment bankers said, I'm not sure if you need that. Just let's lead with the financial metrics. And we said, no, of course we need that. They need to know what they're buying. And because frankly, our quality commitment is what makes us so valuable. And it's part of our business success. It's not one layered on the other. It's of one whole.
Someone else, Chuck, you ran really a consumer products company in 2 different sectors. Are you the same guy? Or
well, I'll make it interesting and differ slightly.
Yeah, okay. So
I mean, I think a little bit what Neal's, I think you can be mission-driven and drive success in the nonprofit sector with a lot of discipline. I think for a lot of the sector, that discipline isn't always there. And I did what you said, Neal, resonated with me a little bit about the challenges around innovation. And what I've been struck by the last couple of years is, it sort of reminds me of the whole principal agent stuff we used to talk about here, which is that there's not as strong of a connection between the principals and the agents in the nonprofit sector. And therefore, there's not as much urgency about results. You can peter along, as you said, for a long time without delivering a lot of impact and still be generating a lot of financing. And as you said, one manifestation of that is there's not a lot of bankruptcies in the nonprofit sector. And not only that, there's not a whole lot of M&A. I remember I've been on the board for many years of a nonprofit in San Francisco that's in a certain outdoor education space. And there are 4 other organizations, small, in the Bay Area who do the same thing. And clearly they should get together. And there's just so many institutional barriers in the nonprofit sector to do it. I came to, instead of calling it mergers and acquisitions, I started using marriage and adoption to see if that would work as a better avenue. Didn't really get me anywhere. And so my personal path lately is I'm sort of, my wheel is turning, and I'm moving back to thinking about the higher potential starting businesses that have great potential. And what animates me, I think, a little bit is some of the work of Jim Collins at Stanford. And what he sees is that the businesses, there's a high correlation in his research amongst businesses who outperform in the stock market are businesses who also have a core ideology like Bright Horizons or Honesty that animates them, and that's something that is above their profit ambition. And that nevertheless enables them to become very profitable. And I think those are sort of the enterprises that I'm excited about now.
Henry Hansman, our own law school professor, refers to the problem you're alluding to as the problem of trapped capital. Trapped capital in small organizations that are too small scale, but somehow serve either an individual philanthropist's needs or maybe a founder's needs one way or another. Any observations before I move on, Neal?
Yeah, I would just, I think this is kind of obvious in this group and all optimists, is, I think we live in extraordinary, exciting times where you see lots of convergence, right? And you can refer. And I do think there is something in this blurring of the boundaries between for-profit and not-for-profit. And there is a class of people that Greg Dees refers to that probably would be successful whether it was a for-profit manifestation or a not-for-profit manifestation. But interesting, I think, in the world in which I operate in, it's, private markets and investment work reasonably well until you get somewhere between people who live on $5 and $8 a day. When you get particularly below $5 a day, that's where you get market failure and all these you get it in other ways too. And so part of the challenge are what are the business models that are going to deliver services to people, smallholder farmers, poor urban dwellers, and so forth, when they live, when they make under $5. And when you think that over 2 billion people live on $2 a day or less, even driving that down, I think up to now we've been hindered by it's either a philanthropic approach or it's a for-profit approach. It's a market that works. And what you're seeing now, I think, in terms of convergence are these blending of financing. Finally, you're getting a little blending of zero cost of capital, often a grant, with markets. And so we're in this messy phase where we're trying to figure out how to make, and I think, from an academic standpoint, I think that is so rich and exciting right now. But from a practical standpoint, I also think, that's where these solutions are going to be found. How are we going to bring clean water to the billion plus people who don't have it, clean energy in a world in which climate change is real, and just go down with health services, the lab on a chip and the power of technology is incredible now. But in that world where I think we're going to have to invent new business models, otherwise it stays boutique-y. We can go, Unilever's got a lot of boutique examples, or the world of social innovation has got great organizations out there. They're all pretty small, and so we're inventing, I think, these new approaches, and that's incredibly exciting. And the entrepreneurs of the future are, whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, or converged, I think could be successful, whatever that model is.
Schumpeter, who, whenever an academic talks about entrepreneurship, the only thing she ever talks about is Schumpeter, because that's kind of where we begin and end. So I will do the same. Schumpeter argued, innovation comes often from combining old things in new ways. And in some ways, that's the way SOM started, thinking about taking things from one sector and putting it in another, learning sector to sector and seeing the way in which, as the boundaries blur, new ideas emerge. And that's the same thing I hear from you, and the rest of the world is beginning to catch up to where we were 35 years ago when you all came. The toolkit, we were built on this principle that we could teach you a bunch of things, economics, politics, org behavior, and somehow whatever you were going to do as you wandered through the sectors, it was all going to be relevant and useful. That was the promise so many years ago. For me, it feels like that promise is more true now than it was then, as I see both sides moving towards this blurry middle. But for you, what in the toolbox of those years ago turned out to serve you as you moved across the sectors, and which things made you think, I was kind of sold a bill of goods? Seth?
Yeah, I think it's probably organizational behavior. I think the idea that...
You're supposed to say economics.
Sorry, I think that especially when you're in the social entrepreneurship, everybody needs a context to understand the context of what they're working in. And of course, we're a profit-driven company, so you could say, well, you get, if you achieve your goal, you get your bonus. But you have to make people feel valued even if they don't get their bonus. Because if it's only focused on a bonus and you don't hit it, then you're left. And actually, Honesty as a business model, we've always said, even if we don't make profits, we're still making impact with every bottle we sell, because every bottle has less calories, it's organic and fair trade. So, and for the first 10 years, we didn't have any profit, so that was a good thing that people understood there was still something valuable going on. So always sort of coming back to making sure people understand why we're doing what we're doing, why the sacrifices, why the passion is there. And then all the other disciplines really did come into I'm so glad I took, despite sort of the pain of accounting and finance for me, which didn't come naturally. I mean, I needed all those to talk to our investors, to be able to manage the business, and then even later to be able to deal with Coca-Cola. To be fluent in those things was critical, and you can't fake it. You really got to, be able to be fluent in all those aspects.
Linda? So the toolkit, I think, from SOM, I think about in a couple of ways. The hard skills were incredibly useful for both sectors, the nonprofit organizations we created and for-profit, so the finance, the accounting, the marketing. The organizational behavior piece was very, very important. But then there are two other parts of the experience here that I think have been even more important to my development as a professional and an entrepreneur and a social entrepreneur. And I've thought a lot about it because it is something that's baked in the DNA of SOM, which was, my experience here really transformed me and gave me the courage to be aspirational, to be audacious, to really think critically about the world and what isn't working, how can we make a difference, how can we do it differently. I didn't have that mentality coming in, but it was this culture. We would sit between classes and late at night and talk about making a difference. And so we were talking about that a little bit at breakfast because we've seen a lot of deans come and go, and deans are important, but you know.
But in the end, not really that important.
But they're except for this dean here. No, not true.
There's at least 3 in the audience.
Yeah. But there's something beyond that. And I think that likewise at Bright Horizons, you know, there's something in our DNA that has nothing to do anymore with me or Roger, any of the leaders at Bright Horizons. And so it's that spirit of I can make a difference, I can be ambitious and audacious. And then the final thing is the network. You know, here it's been 33 years since I've graduated. And in every venture that I've done, it's been infused with SOMers. And this network has been important. And actually, you kind of saved me the early years of Bright Horizons, because when we started the company, you know, a year after we started, the New England sank into a recession. We fell way off business plan very quickly. It was a brand new concept, selling worksite childcare. So in the corporate community that we were trying to sell to, they looked at us as these flaky Peace Corps types who had just come back from Africa. And that, why, I'm a software producer, why would I want kids hanging around? And then in the early childhood community, we were looked at as these slick Yale MBAs who didn't understand. So we were pariah everywhere except at SOM. And so like those early years, I came like every other month just to kind of get the support, the faculty advice, the faculty support, the dean's support, you know, is really, really important. So Indra, I know, started out saying that in her talk yesterday, that it transformed her, and I feel the same way.
So I have one more question. We'll broaden out. I'm going to start with Neal. Leadership in an increasing world, globalization, the kind of almost a meta theme of the weekend. We talked a little bit yesterday about ways in which you manage the business, the global business that you're obviously in, a little bit differently from 10 years ago in terms of the personnel. Can you talk a little bit about how the new world looks from the point of view of running a global business as you do?
Yeah, and you know, here I think again there's a lot of convergence with the for-profit world. In order for us to be successful, you know, you got to tap into the best ideas wherever they are on our planet. You got to tap into the best human resources wherever they are on our planet, and you got to tap into the financial resources or whatever those enabling resources are wherever they exist on the planet. And so just from a human resource standpoint, if you know, my own organization, but I think this is true for our peers, is that if you were to look at our international staff 10 years ago, you know, over 50%, the vast majority would be from Western countries, you know, with a huge group from the U.S. If you were to look today at that, less than 50%, probably less than 40% in our case, are people from the West. And, you know, and one of the big changes we all know as part of this new emerging world is, kind of dates me. I tell my own kids, I don't know if they quite get, but, you know, the difference is if you want to do something in the world today, you know, basically, when I was coming along, you were competing against other folks, you know, young, smart people from the West who'd been, and there are at least 1 billion young, highly educated, probably better educated, who speak multiple languages, who have experience in multiple cultures, and who see the world as their oyster. And increasingly, those are the kind of people, particularly young people, who make up our international. I always go around to different places in my own organization's world. And one thing I always say, I'm kind of glad I'm not trying to get a job today, because I'm not sure I could.
Anyone else? Chuck, you're really an international operation. Most of your staff international?
Increasingly. You know, we had a challenge in the first couple of years in recruiting the kind of talent we wanted in the countries we were operating in. And that's really, and I think in a much faster fashion, that's shifted in the last 2 years. Most of our talent is in the markets where we operate. You know, the other interesting difference on the financing side is that there's a much greater interest in solving problems outside this country amongst philanthropists, U.S. philanthropists, which is a great trend. I think, you know, it's a philosophy that's been espoused by Gates Foundation, which is, you know, the value of a life is the same wherever you go. And it used to be, it's still overwhelmingly the philanthropy here is invested here, but the trend is very positive about people seeking solutions that have global potential.
You know, I think if you listened, some of us went to the Dean's panel yesterday afternoon with Ted and the Deans from our global network, and the emphasis on students learning about other cultures and visiting other cultures and working in other cultures. It's obviously quite different from 30 years ago, in which some went to the Sudan, but most went to Jersey.
Yeah, I mean, another
pretty
point.
foreign.
Another point I'd make is it's, you know, whether you're in a nonprofit or a for-profit, the international opportunities are much greater. You know, the trends in technology and the speed of communication make those opportunities cheaper, faster, and nearer. And I think the strategic trend that the school is on is perfectly aligned with that. And I think it's going to deliver a lot better talent for these kind of organizations.
So I promised 30 minutes for audience, and so I see that is now time, and apparently there are people with mics, so if you raise your hand. I see in the middle, Fred. Looks like it's Fred. So please.
Thank you all for your very inspiring stories, and great credit to SOM, and particularly for sharing them with us. I'd like to ask you if you had the chance to talk to Dean Ted and say, Ted, you're in this wonderful new building, you have an incredible faculty, you have a very collaborative board. Based on our experience, we have 1 or 2 suggestions for you to make SOM even more relevant and even greater. What would you tell Ted?
I'll take a crack.
Go ahead, Seth.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, you know, SOM, as Sharon said, has always had this really strong culture of sort of, you know, business plus. Doing more, business needs to do more than just move around product. It needs to have impact. And the student body always has that, but it seems that it hasn't been institutionalized from a faculty perspective. So, you know, you got great assets like Sharon, but are there ways to either, you know, just as we talked about Greg Dees, where they did set up, whether it's their Center for Social Enterprise or really thinking about how do you ingrain it in the faculty? How do you make it so in a finance course, there's always the discussion of the externalities, not just the straight finance. How do you incorporate whether it's, you know, either course by course or within it's not a department, but just thinking cross-discipline. How do we make sure it's part of the institution, not just the student body?
One other person want to answer, Fred? What are you going to tell Ted?
I'll do an easy one, softball, but I'll shoot over Ted and go to Peter. I just think there's an enormous opportunity in the online space for the university. You've got this incredible asset base here of faculty, expertise, experience, and I think the universities in general have been overly cautious about expanding access to that in the digital environment. I think I would encourage boldness around that in the school too.
You know, we have the capacity for doing an excellent job of videotaping all the lectures, which could be repackaged at least for alumni.
Leverage.
I think a very exciting way. Down here, Eric.
Thank you all for coming. Just to tackle Sharon's first question, I'm actually a joint degree student with the MBA program at SOM, but also the MFA in theater management program at the School of Drama. And my impetus for coming to SOM was to be able to use arts and culture to make that impact, either through arts education or through the economic impact of arts centers and arts companies. And I'd only tailor that by saying that over the years, the internship fund actually has maintained the same percentage of students requesting funding to be able to go do this in their summers, even as the class size has grown. So I would say that that feeling of the student body is definitely still here, and I think my classmates would agree. But my question is that we mentioned how important it is to get the financial buy-in with these causes. And it seems that whether you're in the US or whether you're abroad, government buy-in is just as important to be able to make this change. And if you can talk about your experience with that and the challenges with that, especially when a lot of times what you're trying to do is maybe disrupt what's going on and the politics might not be for you at that point.
I'm thinking, Neal, this must be right up your sweet spot, no?
Yeah, and so, ultimately, long term, you have to have, minimally decent functioning governments. Just look at Haiti. We can continue to spend billions of dollars in Haiti, and there'll be some bright spots here and there of progress, but you won't have sustained progress for the population. Paul Farmer's group won't do it, Mercy Corps won't do it. We'll each bring, unless you get minimally decent government. And I think it's fair to say that the international relief and development world has not paid enough attention to government. And I think in general, and this goes back again, I think to a core value of SOM in sort of that founding philosophy, is I think actually the solutions to any of the big challenges that we face are part of that holy triangle, right? Where you've got to bring together government, markets, and civil society. And within that, right, that triangle, I think that's where you're going to find the real answers, with room from entrepreneurs to bring forward the new ideas. But to scale it, to sustain it, to have it endure, I think it's going to come when you can really bring those partnerships together. So we have an obligation, I think, at some point to find ways to connect community members. That was the problem with community development. It stopped at community members and didn't say their citizens. And build those linkages. And again, there's going to be all kinds of entrepreneurial opportunities with, e-governance, with the ability to leverage the internet for transparency, mobile phones for transparency, and enabling government in ways that just weren't possible, 15 and 20 years ago.
I just have one little story about that, just actually with Mercy Corps. Last month I was in, I'm still serving on Neal's board. I was in Cairo for Mercy Corps, and we, along with other entrepreneurs, we're supporting the entrepreneurial sector in Egypt, helping to build that ecosystem. And we, with some other agencies, both Egyptian and elsewhere, created the first entrepreneurship summit in Cairo in Egypt. And 1,000 people registered, and it was taking place in this space right off Tahrir Square. So 1,000 people were gathering in this open space next to Tahrir Square. Unbeknownst to us, or unsurprising to us, that very day before we started, the government passed a law of no public gatherings. They're trying to head off the demonstrations by the Muslim Brotherhood, no public gatherings. And here we had 1,000 people gathering outside of Tahrir Square. So we were quite nervous as we went that first day. And in fact, Tahrir Square was all blocked off by the government so that there wouldn't be a massive demonstration. Well, we got out of our cars and started walking, trying to get to our space, and all the police were there. And we all made it to this space for this entrepreneurship summit, even though there was a law that was just passed. And it was interesting as we talked to folks afterwards. So the government is, tacitly supporting this. Here we are breaking the law, but they understand that the unemployment rate of university grads in Egypt is twice that of the population of a whole, and they need this entrepreneurship sector to help revive the economy. So I thought that was a very interesting lack of government interference in an area that normally would have been shut down.
But Eric, they call the nonprofit sector the independent sector, and for many governments that is problematic to have another voice for the population, and clearly an issue in all the places Neal works with in terms of helping to move civil society forward. Well, lots of questions. How about in the back? Looks like Ralph from here. Okay. I don't promise I know everybody's name.
Ralph Earl, class of 84. So my question relates to the future. You guys have started your social enterprises over a 30-year period in which the traditional provider of those services, government, has been systemically, at least in the developed world, retreating from providing those services. So I'll call you guys social entrepreneurship, social innovation 1.0. What is social innovation, social enterprise 2.0? Is it the transference of your innovations to the public sector and the expansion using their vast sources of capital? Is it more marriage and adoption? How does the next 30 years look to you?
I'll go first. I mean, go back to that statistic I talked about. The U.S. is 40th in average life expectancy, but the wealthiest nation in the world. There's not a government solution there. There's an incredible market opportunity. And what better market opportunity? If you could play a role, I assume no one wants us to be 40th, and whether that's civil society or individuals want to have the ability to live longer and better. And so there's a market opportunity to play a role in that. So that just feels like a great market opportunity. The best thing government, in this case, I think, can do is just stay out of the way and let markets help people live better and longer.
Chuck?
There can be kind of a dark side to a lot of this work, and I think that you see in some places, in some periods, where the success of the independent sector can lead governments to abdicate what you think is some of their responsibilities, whether that's health or education, public welfare. I'm not sure how I felt about the 1,000 points of light, or how I feel about foreign aid, for that matter. In a lot of these countries where local governments have abdicated a lot of their duty. Not to sound too SOM-y about it, but I don't think that societies really flourish and really succeed without robust, thriving public sector and private sector. I mean, maybe that's oversimplistic, but the private sector can't do it alone and can't solve all these problems. And you need a basic, I think you need, healthcare is one, actually, despite all the work that we do in healthcare, we think that we can provide big solutions in. I don't think you solve the diabetes problem without a great, strong public health system.
How about someone from over here? It's coming. The mic's coming. Yes.
Hi, Lukesh Chori, class of 2014. I was wondering if, especially Linda and Seth, if you can talk about how from a private organization going to a public organization affected your social enterprise. And especially to you, Seth, you talk about going to a company which is known for its high caloric drinks and what kind of difference you have been able to make in your short stint at Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
See, we leave it to the students to ask the hard questions.
That's a good question. So for me, actually, it really hasn't changed. It's all about growth. If you can deliver a business plan, for us, the key metrics are volume, margin, and operating income. If we deliver that, we have total license. So this year, we're actually just converting a part of our line to, we have fair trade tea. We're also adding to making it fair trade sugar as well. So adding to our cost of goods. And we can do that because we've delivered our business plan. So it really comes down to growth. And so we're now in our 16th year of double-digit growth. And if we can keep doing that, we have the license. And we're happy to show the books to anybody. Yes, our cost of goods are more than all the other brands they have at Coca-Cola. But we also were able to deliver that growth every year. And so from my perspective, we'll share whatever we need. There's transparency there. We have to be a little more cautious about what I say in public. I can't go out and just spout off because. But other than that, it's just about delivering a business plan.
So this is Linda's two legs, isn't it?
Yeah, and I love this question because this is something we pondered a great deal when we were creating the company. And over our 27 years of experience, about half our time we've been private and half our time we've been public. And when we created the company, we knew at some point we wanted to take the company public. So we really organized ourselves so that we could really manage seamlessly from one legal organization to another. And we were very, very determined that we wouldn't manage it differently. And part of that, I think, to be able to do that is having the two legs of being very quality and financial strength and being very transparent and saying the same thing to all stakeholders. So we weren't saying to our employees, oh, we're just all about, loving the children and who cares about the finances. We educated our employees as to why it was important that our centers are financially strong and why that was important to our mission. And likewise, so a lot of it was education of our stakeholders. And likewise, we educated our investors. As I said, when we went out on our roadshow, the first third was educating future shareholders on our quality, mission, and commitment, and why that was important to our business success. And that why is a really important part of it. And so we have not managed the organization internally in any different way. Now, of course, when you're public, there are many more reporting requirements and dealing with the analysts and the quarterly earnings announcements, so that's time allocated to that. But the way we manage the company has not changed at all.
Just to go back, one other big change for us, for the first 10 years, incentives were really about equity. Their options could appreciate. And now we've shifted to bonuses. But actually this year, because we hit our plan so we over-delivered, the bonuses people are getting are actually more than the equity appreciation. But going back, it's exactly right. No matter, and if the equity or the bonuses aren't there, we still have to make sure they always appreciate the broader context of what we're doing.
Over here, one of you two, you can wrestle for the...
It's a rare day when I can beat out my classmate, Ed Resor. I'm Susie Francis here at SOM, class of 1980, and I have a question that is primarily for Linda, but also for Seth, probably. Both of you are providing a product or a service that is probably, in the case of Bright Horizons, Linda, that is arguably so fine and has such high quality that it's not affordable by many of the people who need it. I mean, it's not just a question of can you get in, it's a question of can you afford to pay for it. And having been in that world of childcare myself, I wonder whether there are things that you see in terms of best practices or ways to translate that back. And I think you have an example in the providing a voluntary organization to provide services for homeless children. So I'm interested in your answer about how do you make that a bigger social good by taking the lessons that you've learned. And Seth, I can't think of what the analogy is in your case, but I think it is almost a luxury product in some ways, and it allows you to make good profits and provide a good product, but what can we learn?
Yeah. And this actually goes back to the question about what is the role of the public sector. So in many industrialized nations, child care is offered like K through 12 education. It's provided by the state in either free or highly, highly subsidized. And that's not the case in our country, unfortunately. I think that is actually a national tragedy, that the majority of our nation's children are in childcare because the majority of mothers of young children work. And unfortunately, the majority of childcare that's offered is poor to mediocre quality. Why is it poor to mediocre quality? Because the unit economics don't work. To have high quality, you need to hire highly skilled teachers, and you have to have intensive ratios. And so that drives the price up. And it's an enormous dilemma within the field, this trade-off between cost of care and quality of care, because they're directly inversely related. And so we are really concerned about that, to be honest. And our view, even though our business is based on the fact that the government does not provide child care, we would prefer the government to provide child care. And we do a great deal of advocacy around the universal preschool movement. We would like to see universal preschool. And in fact, I was a founding board member for the Massachusetts Department of Early Education and Care, where we passed a law on universal preschool, which was great. However, it was unfunded. So we have universal preschool in Massachusetts that's unfunded or minimally funded. So that is really a national tragedy that we're not going to solve ourselves. We stand very much behind quality. We're not going to provide poor quality care and cut our salaries. In fact, in the early years when we fell way off business plan and were losing a lot of money, one of our founding investors said, we need to stop this flow of red ink, so we need to slash costs. Well, to slash costs is slashing salaries in childcare, which is 75% of our costs, which is then slashing quality, which we refuse to do because these are children who depend on this high-quality developmental care. Now, one way we're chipping away at it in many ways through national advocacy around universal preschool and through employer support. So many of our centers, we don't have a cookie-cutter approach, so each center is different. But many of our centers, we have contracted with the sponsoring client to have childcare on a sliding fee scale so that executives pay full fare, but entry-level people have a highly subsidized cost of care. And, until we have universal childcare, I think this is our national tragedy. But
and I'll just get to address ours. We never set out just to sell healthy products to healthy people. If we only were in selling the whole foods and the natural food source, which we love and depend on, that would have not met our goal. And that's really what behind the thinking for partnering with Coca-Cola. And so for us, we talk about democratizing organics, not making this available not just to people who are already there, but so one of the things I'm most excited about, we're actually in trial right now with one of the 3 largest restaurant chains in the country, where people go in to buy a burger and fries and are going to be able to also at the same time buy organic, low-calorie, fair trade, honest tea in the same purchase. And so reaching people who don't necessarily, and obviously there's a price, making it price accessible too. And so both the scale and the access is really underlying why we wanted to partner with Coca-Cola.
Yeah, looks like Uniton.
Hi, Yoni Landau.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Oh, good. I'm just so booming I couldn't even hear. So Yoni Landau, 2015. I'm amazed. I was going to ask a question about public sector. And I was like, public sector, public sector, public sector. I'm kind of wondering, have things changed over the last 20 years? Have more people realized that you can't do social entrepreneurship without the public sector? From my perspective, that is the case. Our generation is sort of like, you can't ignore the public sector, I feel like, at least. I'm wondering what it was like when you were going to SOM. Was it more like, the 80s, like the private sector will deal with it, and now we've sort of swung back?
The dinosaur year.
Yeah, thanks.
No, I think I think many people were, at least in some of our generation. Seth and Chuck came on a little bit later.
Us old folks.
Yeah, us old folks here. I think we were animated by this idea that at SOM, that leadership and management were relevant across the sectors, and that maybe the ideal student would be someone who would come out and spend time at various points in his or her career across those sectors. And in part, because there was that recognition that they all should be really valued. You can't have a healthy society if you don't have a minimally decent functioning government, if you don't have a thriving private sector that operates with principles and ethics, if you don't have a civil society, right, that's organized in voluntary energy and holding people accountable, and so forth. And that in that mix, you can find satisfaction, you can find meaning, you can find joy, and you can seamlessly cross to public service, to being a successful business person, to really being deeply engaged, whether it is as a leader in the nonprofit sector or on a board, and that in that mix is an awful lot of fulfillment.
I have to confess, so I always had thought my career trajectory would include, running for office and getting involved in politics. And
You're still a young man, Seth.
I guess I won't rule it out. But I have to say the big surprise in my career has been that the work that we can do is so creative, so mission-driven, and so not filled with compromise. And when I look at what's going on, we're in Bethesda, Maryland, so I see, painfully what's going on in, just down the street. It's so unproductive, so stilted, and not really addressing so many of the pressing needs we have, the crises we have going on, that I am increasingly happy where I am, feeling like, all right, well, this is change, this is impactful, without compromise. I feel more inclined to keep doing it than to try to move it into the public sector.
I would say when I first came, Jonathan, in the early 80s, there was a lot of interest in the public sector, and people like Doug Yates, and there were very strong faculty in that area and a lot of student interest. Someplace in the 90s, students got a little less excited about the prospects of working for the government in whatever country they were from. But I, too, see now in the last few years more enthusiasm for kind of the public sector solutions and the public sector needs. I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Yeah, over here.
Thanks. Matthew Emerson, class of 81, and co-classmates with Neal and Linda, and actually a student of yours, Sharon, back when you were a teenage professor. So I actually joined the public sector this week and will be responsible for growth and prosperity here in the city of New Haven. And so my question is, taking over departments with about 350 people, who are only 4 of them actually came in with me, are political appointees. And maybe this is a question for you, Neal, because you've taken over organizations that had existing people and that were bureaucratic. How do we bring a sense of innovation and doing the impossible and really mobilizing sort of a spirit of change to organizations that are both unionized and bureaucracies, and where people don't necessarily see change as something that isn't going to be a huge burden and something that they don't necessarily want to buy into, and yet with all of the issues of social entrepreneurship that I think the public sector really needs to be responsible for, we have such a responsibility to make the city of New Haven be a place that can bring prosperity to Connecticut, and they have to be part of it, and without them I can do nothing. So how do you mobilize people?
By the way, I would just say, as a New Haven resident, we are grateful to Matt for taking on this burden.
Well, I should also say that I've wanted this job for 32 years, so I am somebody who finally got the job they wanted from when they graduated from SOM.
I mean, I think all of us admire you for taking this on, because it is challenging to move a public sector bureaucracy, to overcome some natural inertia, to build in incentives for innovation, for change, and so forth. But I think the good news is it starts with great leadership, and that's what you embody, and it starts with modeling that. It starts with building relationships, all those, going back to those old all the classes on individual and group dynamics and behavior that we all learned and have, and we've all kept up, and, the version of adaptive leadership now. But no substitute for, having a vision in some, that starts with you, and then enabling that to become a shared vision with the change agents, and every organization has change agents. And then building the kind of relationships and accruing the sort of personal capital that allows you to make some of those tough choices, but at the same time showing people what those benefits can be if you can get it right. And I would dare say that I'm sure the vast majority of the people that work there, even though some have maybe gotten cynical over years and some are there for their own self-interest, the vast majority really want to be part of a great city and want to feel that they're part of bringing hope and opportunity to the citizens, particularly to the least of these. And so I think if you can find a way to tap into, for many, that latent desire and inspiration and hope, I think you can set a model for the rest of the country in really powerful ways.
I'm going to have one last question right here.
You've all told us stories of really fascinating stories of success, but could I ask each of you to go back and recall a day that you really didn't think it was going to work, and how you turned that around. And then I have a bonus question if there's time. For Linda and Rogers, what is it like to run a company as a husband and wife team?
Okay, well, you're going to have quick answers for your failures. So, Chuck?
Not failures,
Yeah,
how you turn it around.
All right, turn it around.
Well, in TravelSmith, we had a very dark moment in 2001 after the attacks. It was not a great time to be in the retail business. It was not a great time to be in the travel business, and we were in both. And we went from being a 14% EBITDA business to being a negative 12% EBITDA business in 6 months. So that was a great learning experience. And a lot of it for us was about getting back to the basics and reattaching to our mission. That was, I think, what we had to tap into.
Neal?
Yeah, I think for me is when I started at Mercy Corps, inherited an organization, that had some, I would describe it as fraught with opportunity. But and again, it was this education helped tremendously because the solution with that was, getting the wrong people off the bus and the right people on the bus, getting new set of leadership, really defining a core distinctive so the organization would stand out. In this case, when I took over, the big animating global event was the collapse of the Soviet Union and the unleashing of those conflicts all along those fault lines. And where organizations that traditionally had focused on poverty, that represented a real niche to kind of drive in and focus on how a combination of conflict management, the grievance, growth, and governance can come together in those kind of places. And then, no substitute for building a culture that then tries to encourage people to take risks, be innovative, and really in a highly distributed model. That is so essential that you not have a kind of control bureaucracy that constrains that initiative on the front lines.
Linda?
It was such a high point when the day we took the company public. I mean, that will forever be seared in my mind is such an exciting moment for us when I first started trading and we saw people were actually buying the stock and we wanted to know who each one of those people were. Maybe they could become our friends and they must be really nice people, and we felt like we had arrived. I've loved working with Roger. I feel like it has been such the biggest pleasure of my life to have found a life partner who I love and who I love working with, and particularly creating organizations. So we must have a couple there. They're hugging while I'm saying this. And to be able to ride the highs and lows together. Those early years, we had 6 or 8 really tough startup years for Bright Horizons. And, to come back home at the end of the day and kind of cling to each other during the really tough times with someone who you trust. You're not worried about maneuvering or politics or turf protection, that we really trust. And then to be able to share the highs together is, I feel very blessed. And, there he is. Yeah, Raj said.
It's kind of like Seth's relationship with Barry.
So let me just close first by expressing gratitude to this institution. This really was, I wouldn't be here, not just physically here, but I would not have gone in this trajectory without SOM connecting me to these ideas and obviously connecting me to Barry, but to this whole approach to that business can be so much more than just business. And for me, our worst challenge was for 6 years we owned a bottling plant. It was a disaster. We lost over $1 million, which we didn't have to lose. Production problems, literally, when you're making millions of things, or hundreds of thousands of things can go wrong, and they all seem to. So a really wrenching period of distraction and drain on energy. And for me, I always came back to 2 things. One was the mission of the business that as I said, just as I needed my employees to understand the bigger picture, I kept that in, really at the core of what motivated me and still motivates me. And then the other was having a great partner like Barry, who I could, who could talk me off the ledge. And then the other partner, my wife and my family, being able to be just the best distraction, And If anything, my wife was a little insulated from the business because when I came home, I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to talk about everything else, and she was very happy to do that. And my 3 boys, who, I coached my son's baseball team all throughout the period of growing the business, which I had no business doing because the business would be collapsing and I'd be out there throwing a baseball, but I needed that buffer, and so. That has always, for me, kept me grounded and enabled me to still feel like I'm a whole person, not just a business person.
So I'm going to thank the audience. I want to thank the panel. I feel like if we could just bring the panel across the country with us, we would have applications galore. As I sit here so proud of who you are and what you've done, and the small role SOM has played in that. Thank you. You've been a great audience.
Thank you.